I'm Jo Supernaw, the Director of Academic Engagement for the Lifelong Learning team. And I'm really excited to have you all join us for the first of many offerings with our brand new Duke Alumni Forever Learning Institute. If you haven't heard, the Forever Learning Institute is an interdisciplinary education program that features four thematically organized courses. Each of these courses provides a combination of lectures, panels, online classes, and workshops. And in addition to these events, we've also created a robust syllabus that was generated by recommendations from our Duke faculty and administrators. And the, excuse me, the syllabus includes live audience options from our campus partners. It also includes different podcasts, YouTube videos, playlists, and different articles and books that you can use to keep learning on these different topics. Today's session is part of our human experience theme. In this theme, we're looking at what are the unique things that make our lives as humans different from other species that roam the planet. And for today's session, we're looking at reason and argument. We'll be hearing from Professor Walter Sinnott-Armstrong, the Chauncey Stillman Professor for Practical Ethics with the Department of Philosophy and the Kenan Institute for Ethics at Duke. And I'm gonna grab my notes real quick to make sure I don't miss any of my details while I introduce Professor Walter Sinnott-Armstrong. As you may know him, he served previously as a Duke Alumni Faculty Fellow and presented widely across the United States on topics related to ethics, empirical moral psychology and neuroscience, I can't say this word, Walter, epistemology, you're gonna have to teach me that one, informal logic, and the philosophy of law, religion, and psychiatry. Many of you may also know him from his Coursera MOOC, Think Again, How to Reason and Argue, which to date has over 1 million registered students. His current work is focusing on political polarization, moral artificial intelligence, free will and moral responsibility, and various topics in moral psychology and brain science. Most recently, he was awarded a grant from the John Templeton Foundation to study the development of intellectual humility. I'd like to welcome Professor Walter Sinnott-Armstrong. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I want to start by just telling people how much I am glad to be at Duke. I, taught elsewhere, Dartmouth College for a long time, and when I came down to Duke, it was really like, I felt at home because people here at Duke, do things the way I want to do, namely, don't pay any attention to the disciplines, figure out what are the important issues. And I especially like talking to alumni because I think it's great that you guys come out and want to keep learning because the idea that we can teach you everything you need to know in the 4 years you're at Duke is just ridiculous. Of course not. You've got to keep learning, and I'm glad that you're making that effort. I'm also glad you want to hear about this topic because the topic of reason and argument is very dear to me. I've been teaching about reason and argument since the early 80s, and I really enjoy it, and I think it's a very important topic. One reason I enjoy it is you can take these skills that I'm going to talk about today and really apply them to anything in your life. You can apply them to science or to religion or to morality or to politics, whatever you're interested in. I hope that these skills will help you learn it better. But today, I want to focus on one particular use, which is how arguments can help us live together. And I think that's a really important issue for our time because seriously, it's as Tim Scott says, one of the greatest national security issues. People seem to yell at each other. They seem to take opposite sides. They're fighting, and it's just rampant in our communities and in among our political leaders. And This is a big problem because we can't get anything done if we don't learn to understand each other and to work together. So this is not just among, some people out there, these low lives that are attacking the Capitol in the picture. It's also among academics. So the example that I'm showing here on the screen is a friend of mine, Rebecca Roach, who said that she was going to defriend or unfriend every conservative from her Facebook page. And she said the reason was, they're misguided, they're racists, they're homophobes, they're sexists. I'm tired of reasoning with them. I don't want to reason with them, so I'm not going to be their friends. But look, if intellectuals like somebody, a professor at the University of London can say this, then of course, lots of other people are going to say it too. My picture just screened. Is this changed? Is everything going okay? I hope so. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we just didn't have the screen share on yet.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. You missed my pictures. I had these great pictures. Okay, so let me turn the screen share on. I apologize for that. Got it now?
No. There we go.
Okay. I'll see, had this opening slide, then I had this picture of the people doing the Capitol. Then I had this example from my friend Rebecca Roach, but I explained them all, I hope, well enough. In order to understand this problem, we have to ask first, what is political polarization? People talk about it all the time, but they don't know often exactly what they're talking about. So we got to analyze it a little bit. And the answer, Socrates said, what is justice? I'm saying, what is polarization? I'm a philosopher too, but that doesn't mean you get a single answer. There's a complex answer here. One answer is that polarization is just simply people are at different poles. They're very far away from each other. Their views are so far away from mine. I don't even know where to begin. Then there's another one, homogeneity. Hey, if the Republicans and the Democrats are very far off from each other, but they differ in each group, then there's still going to be overlap. But if they're very far off and everybody in the group believes the same thing, then there's going to be no overlap between the parties. There used to be liberal Republicans and conservative Democrats, but there doesn't seem to be much of that anymore. Another aspect of polarization is isolation. Go away from me, get out of my internet bubble. I don't want to, be your friend on Facebook. Another aspect of polarization is an emotional aspect. I hate them. I hate those other people, that other group. I have these antagonistic feelings towards them. And because I feel that way, I publicly make speech acts. I call them crazy. I call them clowns. They're ridiculous. They're stupid. They're infantile. They're idiots. People use those kinds of words much more frequently, and that's often thought to be what polarization is. There's opacity. How could anyone believe that other view? It's one thing to say you disagree with me. It's another to say, I can't think of any reason why you would hold the view that you hold. I don't understand you. And there's rigidity. Okay, I'm never going to compromise with them. I'm not going to have anything, I'm not going to try to meet them halfway. Forget it. And as a result, there's gridlock. I'd rather do nothing than compromise with them or talk with them. So polarization in our society today includes all of these different aspects: distance, homogeneity, isolation, antagonism. Now, they're obviously related to each other. They're distinct, but they are related. And so I want to ask in my first poll a very simple question, namely, some of these cause others. Which one is the basic cause, the root cause of all the others, such that that's the one that leads to this or that, other things on the list. And as a result, it gives us some goal. Like if we can intervene on that, then maybe we can solve the problem more generally. So I hope that you're getting a poll now. Is that correct? Please confirm that that's working. Joe? Oh, there we go. Okay, now see the results coming in. Good. Rigidity is one thing that's coming up to the top. Homogeneity is going up there pretty high. We got 42 on rigidity, 29 on homogeneity, 14 on distance. Looks like rigidity's beating them out in the end. Look at that, but only 3 of you said my answer. Wait a second. Only 3 of you said my answer. What's the matter with that? Let me try to explain to you why I think the real answer is opacity. Okay. Oh, we got numbers going here. And now, do I want to share results? I guess not. I don't do these polls very often. Stop sharing. Okay. Okay. So let me explain why I think opacity is the answer. Because if we look at this, if you don't understand a person who holds a different political view than you do, then you think they're doing something that's going to be dangerous for your country that you really care about, and you don't understand why they're doing it. You think they're doing it for no reason whatsoever because you don't understand the reason. And that makes you antagonistic towards them. And if you don't understand their position, you don't want to be talking with them, so you want to be isolated from them. And you're going to be more likely to call them a crazy, right? Because they're holding something for no reason that you understand. And you're not going to be willing to compromise. So you're going to be rigid, because how do you compromise with somebody when you don't understand why they're holding the position they're holding? So I think opacity is actually a very crucial one. And I think that if we can do something to help us understand each other, then the other problems might get solved. Maybe we'll still be distant. Maybe we will still be homogeneous in our groups, but we'll be able to work together. And that's the real problem. Okay. So what's the solution? If that's the problem, what's the solution? Well, let me tell you a little story. It's actually a local story from Durham about 2 people who were the best of enemies, as it says. Ann Atwater is the person on the right in the book title, which is to the left of your screen, and C.P. Ellis is the gentleman to the left of her. And what happened was that a local judge, for various reasons, said that Durham needed to integrate its schools. And the question was how to do that in a peaceful way. And a local politician decided that he was going to set up a committee that was going to oversee the process and try to figure out the best way to integrate the local schools. And he asked C.P. Ellis and Ann Atwater to be the co-chairs of the committee. They made a movie about this, which is on the right. The problem was Ann Atwater and C.P. Ellis hated each other, because Ann Atwater was a local activist for civil rights for minorities. She focused on housing, but she also worked on education. C.P. Ellis was the leader of the local Ku Klux Klan. So they could not have been more polarized. They were further apart than you can imagine. At one point, Ann Atwater actually lunged at C.P. Ellis with a knife, and C.P. Ellis used to bring guns to the meetings. They hated each other. So how did the politician get the 2 of them to co-chair this committee? Very simple. He said to Ann Atwater, if you don't agree to co-chair, C.P. Ellis is going to be the only chair. And he said to C.P. Ellis, if you don't agree to co-chair, Ann Atwater is going to be the only chair. They didn't want that. So they both agreed to co-chair the committee. Now, does that mean that they kind of shook hands and everything was peachy keen after that? No, of course not. They met for 8 hours a day for 10 days in a row to discuss this very difficult issue. That's 80 hours total that they met. And during those meetings, they have input from all the stakeholders in the community. They talk to each other and to the other members of the committee at great length. And by the end of it, they had worked out a plan that actually succeeded fairly well. It succeeded in integrating the schools with less violence, less problems than many, many other communities. I think there are two lessons I want to draw from this. One is that when you're very polarized, you shouldn't expect there to be a 1-minute discussion where you do some slogan, some one-liner, and then all the person says, oh yeah, you're right. It took all those many hours, 80 hours of discussion before they could work it all out. It's not something that happens in a minute, so we have to be patient. The other lesson, which is more important for today, is how it happened. Well, of course, it was very complex. There were lots of factors, but here's one that I'm particularly interested in. At one point, according to the book, they didn't really do it in the movie, but in the book, Ann Atwater reportedly turned to C.P. Ellis and said, okay, why do you not want to integrate the local public schools? And C.P. Ellis responded, because I want my kids to get a good education. And I don't think they're going to get a good education if we integrate our local public schools. Now, Ann Atwater at that point, well, if I had been Ann Atwater, I would have taken up a baseball bat and hit him in the head. I mean, that's so annoying. And she showed more restraint than I would have been able to, but she was a saint. And she said, okay, CP, I want your kids to get a good education too, but I want mine to get a good education. And I hope you want mine to get a good education. Now notice just what just happened. What just happened was she asked for a reason for his position. She didn't just ask, what do you think? She asked, why do you think that? And when he gave the reason, she found there was a certain common ground. They both wanted their kids to get a good education. And then they could work from that common ground and make progress. So I think the lesson from this story is that we should seek arguments from the other side that give reasons for the other side's positions, and then maybe we can compromise and work with them. But you might say, wait a minute, arguments don't do that. When people argue, nothing ever happens. Well, I think that's because people misunderstand arguments. People avoid them like the plague because they're not thinking of the right kind of thing that I'm thinking of when I talk about arguments. Okay? Arguments are not fights. Sure, a kid might say, I wish that mom and dad wouldn't argue so much. And that's fair enough. But what they mean by an argument is just yelling and screaming at each other, not giving reasons for their positions. Arguments are also not debates. Some people say, well, he won the debate because his opponent never got to say anything in response to his points. Why? Because he was interrupting him all the time. But that's not an argument. Interrupting somebody is not an argument. It doesn't provide any reason for your side, any reason against their side. And the fact that you didn't hear what they had to say doesn't mean they didn't have anything to say. So that's not the kind of argument I'm talking about. I think we've got to rethink the nature of arguments in a very basic way and try to think about them in a whole new way. So to give you an example, we've got another poll, and I want to see your answers to this one as well. So just imagine a discussion about the game that's going to happen on Saturday. Upar and Yuan, by the way, are two new grad students in philosophy at Duke, or we've accepted them and we hope they accept us. Upar thinks that Duke's going to beat UNC in the big game, and Yuan thinks that UNC is going to beat Duke in the big game. And they're arguing back and forth, giving reasons one way or the other. Duke's good at this, UNC's good at that. And then Yuan says, wait a minute, Duke's top players are all injured. And then Upar says, whoa, I didn't know that. Well, now I guess you're right. I guess, UNC will beat Duke in the big game. And the question is, who won the argument? So you might say Upar won the argument, Yuan won the argument, and neither won the argument. I love doing these polls because you guys never give the answer that I think is right. So it shows that maybe, you'll learn to look at it in a new way. I want to say Upar won the argument. Okay, I should be reporting the poll here. We've got 41% saying neither, 41 now saying both, 16 saying Yuan, and Upar is down at 4. That's good. That shows the kind of view of argument that people have. I want to say that the answer is 1. Upar won the argument. Now, why is that? The reason is that, now we just had some more data. Well, it's basically the same, so I won't bother with reporting that. I think Upar won the argument because he learned something. He won because he ended up better than he was when he went in. When he went in, he had one view, and when he left, he had a different view, which was more accurate. He learned something. All the players were injured. He improved his view, a more informed view, namely that, now he thinks UNC will win. What happened to Yuan? He didn't gain anything. He started thinking that UNC would beat Duke. He ended thinking that UNC would beat Duke. He started knowing that Duke's top players were injured. He ended knowing that Duke's top players were injured. So he didn't get anything out of it unless, he felt great because, he beat Upar. But that I don't think is much of a win that we need to worry about because, what's that worth to him? So I want to say if we want to think of arguments in a more positive, constructive way, it's Upar that won. Now, you might say, Upar didn't win the argument. I want to say he won from the argument. He gained from the argument. That's what I want to say is the way we ought to think about arguments. What are we gaining from them? And we also ought to ask, what are arguments? And hope many of you already know Monty Python's argument clinic sketch. It's a classic in 20th century philosophy. And what happens is a man comes into the argument clinic and says, I want to buy an argument. And he pays £5 and goes down. The first room, the person just starts yelling at him and calling him names. And that's abuse, but abuse is not argument. So he has to go to the next room. And there he meets the man who is supposed to give him an argument. And he says, the person, I guess the man walks in the room and he asks, is this the room where I get an argument? Because I'm confused. Is this the right one? And the man says, well, I told you once. He said, no, you didn't. Yes, I did. No, I didn't. Yes, I did. And whenever he would say something, the person would just deny it. And then he says, this is silly. I came here for an argument. And he says, well, I am arguing with you because I'm saying no, you're saying yes, and back and forth. And then the man gives the dialogue on the screen. An argument isn't just contradiction, that it's not just denying what the other person says. Can be. No, it can't, the man says. An argument is a connected series of statements intended to establish a proposition. No, it didn't. Yes, it is. It's not just contradiction. Argument is an intellectual process. Contradiction is just the automatic, that is non-intellectual, gainsaying of any statement the other person makes. So what's Monty Python saying? First of all, an argument's a connected series of statements. That means an argument is made up of language. That means that other animals that don't have language, or at least not syntax, except in one example of a bonobo, but that's a long story. Most animals don't have syntax, and therefore they can't make statements. And you need statements to make up an argument. So without language, without syntax, you can't have arguments. And it's not just any series of statements. It's not like the statements in a story about what happened. It's some statements. It's giving the statements with the intention of establishing a proposition. So there's one proposition, the conclusion, that the other statements are intended to establish. The premises are the other statements. The conclusion is the proposition that's intended to establish. And what makes it an argument is that the first statements are presented as reasons for the conclusion. The premises are intended to establish or presented as reasons for the conclusion. And that's why it's an intellectual process, because it's a process of bringing out reasons. Okay? So that's what an argument is. Now, why should we argue? Well, when we give arguments, when we ask other people for arguments, and when we listen to their answers, we actually show respect for each other, because we're not fighting. What we're doing is we're listening to their reasons, or we're giving them reasons. Notice you don't do that with your pets. You don't tell your dog, here's the reason why you ought not to poop on the carpet. You just say, no, don't poop on the carpet. You don't try to reason with them. We reason with people when we think that they are able to understand our reasons and that they will be able to act accordingly. So we're showing respect to that extent. Furthermore, when I listen to your arguments and learn your arguments, it helps me understand you. It helps me understand what you believe and what you do, but more importantly, it helps me understand why you believe it and why you do it. It's a much deeper kind of understanding, and it leads to very important results. If I understand your position, then I can forgive you. I think, okay, we have different views about how to make our country better, but I understand why you think your policy is going to make our country better. And so I can understand you, so I'm willing to forgive you, and then maybe I'll hate you less. I still disagree with you, but I think I understand your goals, I understand your reasons. I'm not going to start thinking you're a crazy clown or a stupid idiot. And it also enables us to compromise and to cooperate. Remember Ann Atwater and C.P. Ellis. Why were they able to compromise on a plan that integrated the Durham public schools? They were able to compromise because they understood each other's reasons, namely getting their kids a better education. Then they came out with a goal which maybe didn't give the white kids the best education or the black kids the best education, but it did the best overall for all of them. So it was a compromise between the two groups, and then they could cooperate and integrate the schools. Okay. So it seems to me that arguments can reduce that opacity, and by reducing opacity, by helping us understand each other, it can reduce polarization, enable us to hate each other less, compromise more, and cooperate and get through gridlock. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, boy, Walter, you are so optimistic. You are so idealistic. Haven't you ever read David Hume? David Hume said, reason is and ought only to be the slave of the passions. So is it reason that's really doing this? Well, we could argue a lot about what David Hume really meant by that. I think it's compatible, but I'm not going to go through history. Instead, I'm going to say, look, we've got contemporary evidence that actually looking at these arguments really does do some good. So this is a recent study by my friends Eric Schwitzgable and Peter Singer and Brad Coquelet, who I don't know, but they did a study where they took students in their intro ethics course, and some of the students got a day where they discussed whether you ought to be a vegetarian. And other students got a day when they discussed world poverty and what people's obligations are with regard to world poverty. And what they did to find out whether these classes had any effect on their behavior is they took their cards, which they used at restaurants around the campus, checked over 13,000 food purchases, and they could tell whether the people were buying meat items. So they classified how much meat they bought before and how much meat they bought after. And sure enough, the group that had learned about the arguments for and against being a vegetarian, they bought less meat. Now, they only bought a little bit less, fair enough. They didn't all become vegetarians. Only 2 of them out of 500 became vegetarian, or at least bought no meat in the week after the class. So it wasn't an immediate thing. No more than C.P. Ellis is all of a sudden going to say Ann Atwater's right. Instead, it takes time, but 7% here, 7% there. Now, some people might say it's not really the reasons at all. They showed them pictures of the animals suffering. Okay, they did show them pictures of the animals suffering, but they also did a later study suggesting that's not what did the work. What did the work was the arguments, and they did that by giving the arguments without the pictures and the pictures without the arguments and the two together. And it turned out that the pictures actually produced some counter reaction. The arguments were what was producing the reaction. Okay. Does that mean that everybody listens to arguments? Of course not. Not everybody listens to arguments. As a matter of fact, some people listen to them in the wrong way. Here's another study by Cass Sunstein where what he showed, this is actually in a talk that he gave at Duke, where he showed that if you take people who think that climate change is a looming disaster and the most horrible thing in the world, and you showed them some evidence that actually it's not as bad as they might imagine, then they become even more forceful in their positions. They now think it's not just a looming disaster, it's a looming, horrible, tremendous disaster. And if you take people who think, well, climate change is a problem, sure, but it's not as bad as many people make it out, and then you give them reasons why it is a looming disaster, it is as bad as other people make it out, then they say, oh no, it's even not as bad as I thought it was before. So they're going the wrong way. But if you look at the people in the middle who have medium climate change beliefs, that's what CCB means, then what you find is that the bad news they react to as bad news, and the good news they react to as good news. So it turns out the extremists on those two sides don't listen to the reasons, whereas the people in the middle actually do listen to reasons. So now the question is, who should you be talking to when you're giving your arguments, when you're listening to their arguments? Who's worth discussing the issue with? So let's change over to pandemic relief, right? One of the big issues today is how big should the pandemic relief package be? Should it be 1.9 trillion, as Biden thinks, or should it be 600 billion, as Republicans are proposing? And the question is, which person should you try to talk with first? This is our third poll. Amy says, US deficit's already too high, so we shouldn't be giving anybody any handouts. And Barney says, well, there's too much inequality, right? We should be giving, everybody enough money to catch up. And Claire says, I don't know. I'm really not sure. There's strong reasons on both sides, and I just find it really hard to weigh them, right? Or none of them whatsoever. Hey, now you're getting it. Okay, now I've got a poll that actually people agree with me. Look at this, 98%. Okay, I made it too obvious. It's kind of obvious. The person you should talk to, according to Sunstein's study, is Claire, because she's going to actually listen to your reasons and not misinterpret them and not end up going the opposite way. Good. Pretty clear. Now, the question is, if you're going to listen to somebody's argument, you got to first figure out what the argument is. You got to second figure out, like, what are the premises, what are the conclusions, and so on. So we got to get through that. Okay. That means, what do you want to do to understand the other person's argument? You got to identify the purpose. What are they trying to achieve? You got to get its parts. You got to look at structure, how the different parts fit together. We're going to focus on close analysis. Close analysis really looks at the particular words in arguments, reasons, conclusions, and argument stoppers, which I'll get to. First, conclusion markers. That just indicates that the following sentence is a conclusion. Namely, it's the sentence or proposition that the argument's trying to give a reason for. These include words like therefore, thus, and that is why. So, for example, I was tired when I left the golf course. Is that an argument? No, because when just means at the same time. It doesn't mean that either's a reason for the other. What about, I was tired, so I left the golf course? Yeah, you can tell that's a conclusion marker because you can put therefore in. I was tired, therefore I left the golf course. Or I was tired, and that is why I left the golf course. What about, I left the golf course, so I was tired? I left the golf course, therefore I was tired. It barely makes sense, but it sounds like they're leaving the golf course as a reason why they were tired. What could they be thinking? Well, maybe, their adrenaline's flowing while they're on the course, but when they lose the adrenaline, they feel how tired they are. Maybe, but it looks like they're giving an argument. You can't, however, just look at the words so, because you can also say things like, I was so tired. And that's not an argument. That's just saying I was very tired. Okay, so now reason markers. They indicate that the sentence after that is a premise, namely it's what gives a reason for the conclusion. And that's things like because and for, and the reason is. So now we can contrast the same sentences. I was tired when I left the golf course. Since I was tired, I left the golf course. Because I was tired. Notice you can substitute because in there. So it sounds like it's a reason marker. Because I left the golf course, I was tired. Again, doesn't make much sense, but it sounds like it's saying that the reason I'm tired is that I left the golf course, because the word since, when it's used like because, means what follows is a reason. I've been tired since then, just means since the time when that occurred. So that's not, and you can't substitute because. I've been tired because then. I'm not even sure what that means. Okay, so, and the reason is what what's being done here, is what's indicating indicating there's a reason there. So now let me give you an example, make sure that you're getting the idea. This is just, what we're doing here is the kind of thing we do in our courses at Duke. We go, okay, here's a sentence. He built himself a castle, hence he has no money left. What's the word hence doing, right? Is it a conclusion marker, a reason marker, neither, or both? Notice the picture in the upper right is Rougemont Castle, which is about 20 minutes north of Duke. Next time you visit Duke, you ought to go check it. Exactly, good, so you're getting it. It's a conclusion marker, is the 73% now. And that's right, because the conclusion is that's why he has no money left. So you can substitute therefore, he has no money left. Okay, good. So the next group I want to talk about is argument stoppers. And then we're going to have an exercise for them that you can do in your breakout rooms. The problem is the problem of justification. Okay. Am I muted now? I don't think so. I think somebody muted me. Okay, good. The problem with justifying beliefs is why? A little 5-year-old kid can do that, okay? And I don't think there's any general philosophical solution to this problem. I can send you my books if you want, but I think there is a practical solution. And there are 3 that we're going to talk about, ones that stop the argument. One of them is a guarding term. Okay, think about this sentence. All Duke students are smart. Therefore, you ought to, I don't know, send your children to Duke. Is that right? Of course not. I can give you an example of a Duke student who's not that smart. I had one a couple of terms ago. Didn't do very well. Tried hard, but just couldn't get the material. It's not true that all Duke students are smart. And I can refute that just by giving you one example. So let's change it to most Duke students. Well, wait, most means more than half. Have you done statistics? Do you know that more than half are? Well, many are. Sure, many are. And some are. That's easy. I just got to give you one example. So what you can do is you can take that premise, all Duke students are smart, and make it easier to defend by changing it to most Duke students or many Duke students or some Duke students. A lot of times people just leave off the quantifier. They say things like police are racist. Now, are you saying all police? I can give you a counterexample. Are you saying most police? Well, have you done the statistics? Are you saying many police? Yeah, too many. Too many. I think everybody agrees on that. And you can get agreement by being more specific and adding a quantifier, and you guard it with other terms like probably, maybe, I suspect. What you're doing with words like this is you're making it easier for your opponents to say, yes, I agree with that premise. And now we're going to see what they're not going to question it, so it stops the argument. And we're going to see where can we go from there. When should we do it? Well, when if we made a stronger claim, it would be false. When we want to admit uncertainty. And when should we not do it? We should not do it to fool other people into thinking that what might be the case will be the case, or what is sometimes the case is always the case. My favorite example is meteor insurance. Imagine somebody comes to your door and says, I want to sell you some meteor insurance for your house because a meteor might strike your house. And if it does strike your house, then you're going to be out a lot of money. Okay? But that doesn't mean that you should buy meteor insurance because it's extremely unlikely. They've weakened it. So you got to agree, yeah, a meteor might strike your house, but they haven't, they've weakened it too much because you can't buy insurance for everything that might happen. Second type of argument stopper, assuring. What I'm claiming is so obvious that anybody with any common sense knows it. Notice that if you go, well, I don't know it, then they've just said, well, you must not have any common sense. It's like a veiled way or an indirect way of insulting you if you disagree with them. So how do you respond to something like that without sounding like an idiot? One way to do it is to say, well, why? Why is it so obvious to you? Ask that question that Ann Atwater used. Why is it so obvious? Now you listen to their reasons, or they realize they don't have any because they can't answer your question. Another way to do the same thing is with words like surely and certainly and convincingly. Surely this is true. Certainly this is true. He argued convincingly that, this was true. Or how about this one? Studies have shown that. Notice it's saying there is a reason. It's in these studies, but I'm not telling you which studies, and I'm not telling you what the studies found. Or telling you what they found is not telling you how they supported it. A reliable source in the room where it happens reported that. Well, wait a minute. How do you know it's reliable? How do you know they were in the room? How do you know they really said that? They're not giving you that. They're saying there is a reason. They're giving you a little bit of information about what kind of reason it is, but they're not giving you enough reason that you can say, whoa, well, I disagree, because you can't say it must not have been a reliable source because you don't even know what the source was. So that's how it stops the argument, because you can't raise questions about it because they're merely saying there is a reason. They're not saying what the reason is. Okay. When should we use assuring terms? Well, we should use assuring terms when authorities are reliable, but hard to explain. The doctor told me that this drug will make me less likely to have a heart attack. Okay, I haven't done this. I didn't go search out all the scientific articles to see why the doctor believes that. I just take their word for it. That's totally reasonable. Sometimes it's reasonable to stop arguments in that way, but we should not use them to signal reasons that we don't really have. That's a trick. It's saying, like you go, studies have shown that, blah, blah, blah. And person goes, oh, okay, well, if studies have shown it, I believe you. But it turns out you don't really have any studies, or those studies were no good, right? Then you're just using that phrase as a trick. Third kind of argument stopper, discounting. I'm going through these fairly quickly now because we're going to have an exercise for you to use them in. To understand discounting, I think it's good to contrast two different phrases. Suppose somebody, your stockbroker says, you say, I want to invest in this company, and the stockbroker says, well, let's talk about that for a minute. Admittedly, they have a great product, but they have stiff competition. Now think about it. Does that sound like the broker is going to be arguing for investing in the company or against investing in the company? I think that's going to be arguing against investing in the company, because he's saying, admittedly, they have a great product, but the more important thing is they have stiff competition. But suppose instead he says, admittedly, they have stiff competition, but they have a great product. Now it sounds like he's arguing for investing in the company, because he's saying, I admit the other side, but the important thing is this great product. Maybe that means they're going to beat out the stiff competition. So notice what the word but is doing here. It's saying both of these things are true and they're in conflict with each other, but the one following the but is more important. The reason following the but is the important one. Okay. Other words do the same thing, not just the word but. However, although, still, although does it the other direction. The sentence after the although is less important, but all of these words say both of these things are true. They conflict with each other in some way, and one of them is more important than the other. Okay. When should we use these terms? There are legitimate uses and there are illegitimate uses. When you want to admit reasons on both sides, you admit that you want to show that you understand the other side and recognize there is a reason over there. To head off misleading objections. Because notice if you say, my opponents might object in this way, but, and you respond to that objection, then you've gotten to formulate the objection in your own words. They don't get to formulate it, you do. And you get to respond to it before it misleads other people. So there are advantages and legitimate uses of discounting, but there are also illegitimate uses. You should not use discounting term merely to hide flaws in your own views. One example of this is discounting straw people. If you say, well, my opponent might, object that, nobody should trust me because you torture young children, or nobody should believe me because your view implies that slavery is okay, then what I've done is I have raised an objection to my view, but it's an objection that that person would never say. That's not the objection they would raise. And I've shown that I can respond to that one, but I haven't shown that I can respond to the real objections to my view. Okay. So now we've got a whole bunch of different types of words: reason markers, conclusion markers, guarding terms, assuring terms, and discounting terms. And just to make sure you understand these as a final exercise, we're going to break you out into rooms. I think there can be about 10 per room. And Stacy's going to do this at some point. And what I want you to do is to take the passage that you will be able to get in your chat. Is that right, Stacy? That there's going to be a link in the chat and it's going to have this passage. And then when you get to the room, think about these 5 words yourself and then talk to the other people about it. Of course, introduce yourself to everybody in the room as well. But eventually I want to bring you back to the room. You'll get a 1-minute warning. And then we're going to talk about these 5 words and whether they are conclusion markers, reason markers, assuring, discounting, or guarding terms.
Thank you, Walter, so much for being our kickoff event. And thank you to all of you for your love of learning and for your continued support of Duke University. We hope you have a wonderful day, and we look forward to seeing you at another event in the future.
Thank you all.